Okay, let's give it a second. The recording is starting, and here we go. Okay, perfect. So everybody, welcome to this webinar on data analysis using pivot tables in Excel. There is a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to dive straight into it and walk us through what are we planning to cover in this session. And so, who am I? I think most of you already know me from various channels, but in case this is the first time we are interacting, my name is Pranav Dhar. I have 11 plus years of experience in various analytics and visualization roles. I have worked with a lot of projects, a lot of Fortune 500 companies for different kinds of projects, different kinds of content. And in the last few years, about last 5, 6 years, I've been heading the business intelligence or BI trainings for a lot of companies, and I take trainings on obviously Excel, but apart from Excel, Power BI, Tableau, SQL, Alteryx, and a couple of other tools here and there. I am also a very recent founder of my company called Learn to Visualize. I'll talk about that later on, but I thought I should mention that as something that I am very excited about, and I will talk about that later. So that was very quickly about me. And what is our agenda? So let's get into it. What are we planning to cover here in this webinar? First of all, what I want to do is using the data set that I just shared in the chat window. When you open the data set, and I'll just show you that in a second, there are 4 different sheets in that Excel workbook. Now, we can work with those 4 sheets. We can create pivot tables. That's not a problem. But I just wanted to give you a flavor of if I have on a regular basis, if I have reports coming in, let's say on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever, at some frequent interval, how do I very quickly combine those reports in a way that keeps getting updated in my pivot table? There are multiple ways of doing that, but one of my favorite ways and one of the most efficient ways that I've come across in Excel, and it's also there in Power BI, is the Power Query feature. So I'll walk you through that. But you will need Excel 2016 and future versions to use it. Anything prior to 2016, I'm not sure Power Query is on that. So we'll quickly do that. If you're not able to do that, that's fine. You can pick up one of those sheets and work with that. That will also work. So we'll quickly do that. We'll then create a first pivot table. Then we'll try and answer a few business questions using pivot tables. And we look at first of all, we look at raw values, very simple pivot table. Then we'll see how do I convert those raw values into percentage values to answer different kinds of business questions from different perspectives. We'll also see some tips and tricks that, okay, percentages are fine, but if I want to see the difference of how much revenue I earned this year versus how much I had last year, very common business question, but how do I answer that in a pivot table is also important, because pivot tables, as you guys will already know, are one of the most flexible ways of presenting our data, creating reports and all that. So answering it inside a pivot table is actually pretty easy, but a lot of people are not aware of these very subtle things that are there. So we will answer those different business questions using calculations in pivot tables. We will also look at slicers and timeline slicers. These are very interesting and very flexible ways of playing around with the data that we have. Usually my experience has been that end users, clients, stakeholders, even managers, project managers, whoever is basically using our pivot table or pivot tables, they end up using slices a lot just because they're very, very dynamic in terms of what they do. So we will also look at that. We will, if time permits, I hope it does, we'll also look at conditional formatting in pivot tables. How do if I want to just attract the attention or the eyeballs of my end user to a certain part of my pivot table, how do I do that? Obviously, conditional formatting is a very nice and easy way to do it. So we will try and at least look at the basics of conditional formatting in pivot tables. We will also very quickly touch on pivot charts for dashboards. While we simply will not have time for dashboards, if you understand pivot charts and how to make them dynamic, how to connect multiple pivot charts in multiple pivot tables, you can very easily create a dashboard out of that. So we look at that, and we'll also throughout this session, I will just wherever possible, I'll try and bring out some tips and tricks that I find very helpful from a reporting efficiency point of view. So I will try and bring that out. And obviously, towards the end, we will also have the Q&A when we get there. All right, there is one thing I want to mention, and I always say this regardless of whichever training or webinar we are taking, is that Excel is a beautiful tool. It's a wonderful tool. It's very, very flexible in terms of what it does. And I'm sure most of you guys, if not all of you, would have been using Excel for a long time. And even if you're a fresher, you would have heard of Excel if not used it before. But it's at the end of the day, it is a tool. It comes down to how well can I leverage the tool? Can I leverage Excel to answer business questions? That is what the business looks for. Whatever role you're working on, whether you're working for yourself, whether you're working for a company, whatever you're doing, at the end of the day, it is a business question or business question, a business problem you want to answer. So you want to combine that and try and apply that methodology while we are going through this particular session. So we will, wherever possible, we will try and do that. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to one final time just share this data set in the chat window in case anybody missed it. If you want to follow along, please do that. If not, you can just watch and just see how we are performing those different things, and we can get into that. All right, so with that, let me open up my Excel workbook. Here we are. So this is what we're working with. If you've ever worked with Tableau or if you've attended one of my previous sessions, you will be very familiar with this data set. It's the Superstore data set that I frequently use to walk people through these different tools that I take trainings for. So what we are going to do here is I've divided that data set into 4 sheets. As you can see here at the bottom, I have the 4 years for which we have data for. So 2018, 19, 20, and 21. And this data set is for a hypothetical company in the United States called Superstore, which has a treasure trove of data about different things. So you have order level information here, order ID, order date. Year is probably, I don't know if you'll use that or not, but it's there. And we have shipping date as well. So when was the order placed? When was the order shipped? We have what kind of ship mode was there? Was it first class, same day delivery, etc.? I think there are 4 shipping modes that are available. We have customer level information, so customer ID, customer name, and which segment the customer belongs to, consumer, corporate, or home office. Country is always United States, so it's kind of a pointless column at this moment. Then location level information, city, state, postal code, region. Then you have product level information, like what is the product ID that was purchased, which category and subcategory does that product belong to, and what was the actual product name. And then we have the fun part, the values, sales, quantity, discount, and profit. That is what we're working with. And across the years, 2018, 19, 20, and 21, that is exactly what we have for each year. So what we want to do here is, first of all, since I have data across 4 sheets, ideally I want it in one place. I want a kind of a master sheet, which I can pull into the pivot table and continue my work there. And if in the future, let's say for 2022, for example, new data comes in for 2023, that data should automatically populate in my master sheet. I want to do that so that I don't have to copy paste it every time. And that is just, I mean, at an year level, maybe you might think, yeah, fine, I'll copy paste it. I don't care. That's fine. It's entirely up to you. But if it's, let's say, a daily data, weekly data, you don't really want to copy paste it every week, every Monday morning. You're already having Monday blues in the office. Why would you want to? First thing in your head when you're leaving for office is, I have to do this again. So why not automate that pipeline if at all that's possible? So what you want to do here is I want to show you very quickly how we can do that using this concept called Power Query. Power Query, what this is, if you haven't heard of it before, it's also available inside Power BI as well. Power Query is an inbuilt tool inside Excel, which allows you to pre-process and clean your data before you do anything in Excel. And the advantage of using Power Query is that you don't have to remember any functions. You don't have to type in huge if else nested if statements. You don't have to do any of that. All of that is handled by the Power Query editor. You just have to remember where that button is. That is all you have to remember. So enough with the hype. Let me actually show you how that works. So to get to Power Query, what you'll have to do is, first of all, in your ribbon here at the top, go to this data tab. Go to the data tab in your ribbon. And by the way, guys, if you have any questions while we are going through this webinar, at any point, if you feel I'm going a little too fast, it's a little difficult to follow along. The example I'm using wasn't very clear. So feel free to stop me. Feel free to tell me, Pranav, I didn't really understand what you just did. I will try and either slow it down or show a different example if that's possible at all. And if I don't know the answer to that question, which is very likely, then I will try and find an answer after the session. I'll share a link across over email once we're done here along with the recording. But please don't let that hold you back from asking questions, because at the end of the day, I don't want this to be a monologue. I want everybody to get the maximum out of this webinar. So please feel free to ask questions wherever possible. And if you feel shy that nobody else is asking, I don't want to stand out, you can just send me a private message. I won't call out your name, but I'll still try and answer the question. All right, so here, back to this, go to the data tab in your ribbon. And here on the left-hand side of your data tab on Excel 2016 onwards, you have this get and transform data section, where we have things like get data from text, CSV, from web, and all these different things. So at this point, you might think, yeah, that's pretty straightforward stuff. I'll just go there and get the Excel file. And what's the big deal? The big deal is when you go to this big get data button, if you click on this get data button, and you scroll down to, I mean, you have different ways of getting data into Excel. You can get it from, obviously, like an Excel workbook, from a JSON file. All of these are static files. You can also connect to an Access database, SQL Server. You can you can connect to Azure. Obviously, it's Microsoft, so they'll give you Azure. You have a lot of different things here. But what I want to do here for now is I want to go to this option called From Other Sources. Go to From Other Sources. And we have a bunch of things here, but what we want to do here is go to the last option, which says blank query. So go to get data, go to from other sources, and scroll all the way down to where it says blank query. And when you click on that, you'll have to give yourself a second. What this does is it opens up a new window inside Excel itself called the Power Query Editor. As you can see here, this is called the Power Query Editor. This is the inbuilt tool inside Excel for data preprocessing and a lot of different other things. If you've heard of the term ETL, extract, transform, load, this is Excel's answer to that. If you haven't heard of the ETL before, don't worry, you don't need to learn any of that anytime soon. So this is what the Power Query Editor looks like. I'm not going to go into any of the interface or anything like that. I just want to show you how we can do this. So here, when we get into Query Editor, you notice most of it is blank, and that's because we clicked on From Blank Query. That's why everything is blank here. What I want to do is I want to combine all the 4 sheets that I had, right? It's very, very simple. Just in this formula bar that will open up, just type in equal to Excel, and the first pop-up, or not the pop-up, the first tooltip that will come in is Excel.current workbook. That's exactly what we want. So there's no need to even remember it. Just type in equal to Excel, select the first one, bracket, open and close, and press enter. So Excel.current workbook, bracket, open and close, press enter. And you will get the names of the 4 sheets or the 4 tables that we had inside Excel. You notice 2018, 19, 20, 21. We have those here, and all I have to do now to combine them, and it really is this simple, is you'll notice I have 2 columns here. I have content and I have name. So next to content, where you should see a filter icon, I have these 2 arrows going away from each other. So if I click on this very small icon, where you have these 2 arrows going away from each other, if I click on that, that is a combine button. So when you click on that, you will get all the different columns that we just saw in this Excel workbook. All the columns are here, from order ID all the way to profit. All of them are here. And you have this option called use original column name as prefix. Just untick that. Just do yourself a favor. Don't select it if you don't want headaches later. So just make sure it's unselected. And whatever, we want all the columns, so we'll keep all of this selected. But in case you feel no, region is something maybe I don't want to include, or whatever you don't want any other columns, you can deselect them so that they're not shown in the combined file. That's entirely up to you. For us, we want all of them because we want a combined file for all 4 tables. So we'll keep all of them selected. Deselect this and just go ahead and hit a round of OK. Just hit OK here. And as soon as you do that, in a second or 2, depending on the RAM on your machine, you will get what looks like an Excel workbook here. And if I scroll to the right, you will notice the final column is called name. Name is nothing but the name of the sheet that basically we have combined. So Sridevi, just give me a second. So here I can see SS 2018. and we'll get 2019, 2021, all of them here, which basically verifies and confirms that we managed to combine the files. There is one minor thing that we want to do here, and that is, you'll notice when I did that, order date and ship date have the time component here as well. It has 12 a.m. across the board. That's because Power Query by default, if it doesn't encounter a time, it adds a time by itself. So we can let it be. It's not that big of a deal. But if you want to get rid of this time component, you feel no, that is not adding any value at all, I want to just show the date. All you have to do is here at the top, where it says order date, this column, you'll notice a very small written, a very minute ABC123. That's the data type of that column. So I can click on this icon where it says ABC123, and I can just say this is actually a date and not a date, comma time. I'll just select date here so that this is converted to just the date component and the time component is gone. I can do the same thing for ship date. I can just say this is a date and this is gone, right? So that's the extent to which we'll do Power Query here. I can talk about Power Query for 5 hours, 10 hours. It's very, very useful and very comprehensive in what it does. But this is where we leave Power Query. That's all I want to do. I want to combine the files, make sure the data types are in order. And what I can do now to go back to my Excel workbook is here at the top, you'll have this ribbon where you have home, transform, add column and view. In the home tab, the very first button on the left hand side is close and load. And as it says, when you hover your mouse over it, that you can save your changes to this query, blah, blah, blah. All it means is just save it and go back to Excel. That's all it does. So once you are sure that, okay, I'm done, I'm very happy with whatever I've done here, the data cleaning, etc., is done. Just go ahead and click on close and load. Give it a second. And here you'll get a new sheet in your Excel workbook called Query 1. That's because we didn't rename it. We can do that now. So this is called Query 1. And here I have all the 4 files combined into one sheet. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time here on different things. There is one very cool thing I want to show you. And the advantage of what we've done here is that now here on the right hand side in this queries and connections, you'll notice query 1, these many rows were loaded fine. What I want to show is if I right click on this query 1 and I go to properties, right click on query 1 and go to properties. This is where the magic of the background refresh happens. You'll notice here in the refresh control section, I have a bunch of things like enable background refresh, refresh every. So if you have data coming in, let's say every hour, every day, every week, whatever frequency it is, you can just say, you'll have to convert that into minutes. There's no other way to do it. But let's say I want to look at it every, let's say, 3 hours. Right, so I'll put in 180 minutes. So what this does is the time your Excel file is open, it's supposed to be open all the time. Otherwise, this will only work once your file is open. So from the time of your opening of the file, every 3 hours, this query, this combined file will look for new data. So as more and more data is added in your sheets, in your existing sheets, in new sheets, every 3 hours or whatever you put in here, that data will automatically get added. I'm going to unselect that, but it will automatically get added to your master sheet that we just created. And you don't have to worry about, copy pasting data. Did I forget a particular row, a particular column? Nothing you have to worry about as long as the structure is the same. And by structure, I mean the sequence of these columns is the same. This is nothing but an automated pipeline that you've created, and you don't need to worry about anything after this point. Everything gets updated. All you have to worry about is how do I present it? How do I report it? All the other things you have automated using Power Query. I'll go to the chat window. We had a couple of questions there. So, Joanne, any other method for older versions of Excel? Not as far as I know. There is something called Pivot Chart Wizard. If you just Google that, that was the older way of doing this. But the last time I tried it, it was very, very slow and gave me a lot of errors. So I've kind of stopped doing that. It might be worth checking out though on an older version. But apart from that, I think what I usually do, if it's pre-2016 or pre-2013 versions, the only way to do this, the most best way to do this is just copy paste it one on bottom, one on top of another, something like that. That's probably the quickest way of doing it because Power Query will not work on any previous versions. All right, so Sridevi, if error comes under content, what does it mean? So Sridevi, what kind of error? Usually that error will mean that either Power Query is not quite understanding what command you used, or it's just the format of the Excel workbook is there's some problem with the format. That's why it's not able to properly convert that into a Power Query file. Those are two very common reasons why that happens. The second one is easier to solve. The first one, where you it's a little difficult to pick out what it is. Just make sure I'm just putting this in the chat window. When you get to the blank query part, just type in this equal to excel.workbook and don't forget the comma, not the commas, the brackets. Otherwise, you might run into some issues. If it's not happening right now, don't worry. Just exit the Power Query editor. Just come back to this and you can only work with a 2018 file here. That's fine. Or just pick any file and you can work with that. That's not really a problem. All right. So here, what I want to do is now that we have a master sheet, I want to get into the meat of why we hear pivot tables. Mahesh, if you are using older version, we can install Power Query add-in. You can absolutely do that. I am not sure how feasible that will be on older versions or how slow that will be, but it might be worth trying out. Thanks, Mahesh, for that idea. All right. So anybody, if you have any questions, I can see a couple of raised hands. If you have any questions, feel free to just put that in the chat window. I'll just try and get to it if I can. Otherwise, we'll have the Q&A for the last 5-10 minutes anyway. All right. So coming back to this one, what I'll do is I want to finally get into the meat of why we hear pivot tables. What we will do here is to get a pivot table now. If you manage to do this, if you manage to get a master sheet using Power Query Editor, all you have to do is at the top in your ribbon, you'll notice there are two new tabs that have come in: Table Design and Query. So if I go to Table Design, I have this option called Summarize with Pivot Table. Anytime you convert your data from a range to a table in Excel, you will always get this table design at the top. And you can say Summarize with Pivot Table. In case this is not working, in case you don't have a table or you don't see this at the top, that's also perfectly fine. What you can do instead is you can go to Insert, go to this Insert button in your ribbon. And this is the good old-fashioned way of getting something into pivot table. So I will go ahead and click on Insert. And you can click on this Pivot Table button here on the left-hand side. Click on the Pivot Table button. Click on the Pivot Table button. And here you will get a pop-up from Excel saying, OK, fine, I'll create a pivot table for you, but you'll have to tell me what is the data that you want in the pivot table. What is the table or the range that you want in that pivot table? If again, like if you did the Power Query and if it worked like it did for me, you might get in the table range, it will get the name of the table, which is query 1. In case this didn't work, all you have to do is by default, Excel is smart enough to understand that you want the entire table. But if it's not in this table or range, you just you click anywhere inside the table, hold Control A on your keyboard, and that table and the range will show up here in this table range option. Second question, where do you want the pivot table? We definitely wanted a new worksheet, so I'll keep that selected. And we want everything basically as it is. So in a way, we're not really doing anything here. We're just verifying that the information is fine and it's fine. So we'll go ahead and click on OK. Go ahead and click on OK. Another new sheet will open up here at the bottom called Sheet 1. Which is where, because we asked Excel to create a new sheet for us to place the pivot table, this is where we see this. And here what we want to do is we're going to start answering business questions. Right now that I had the outline of a pivot table, we've done the hard work, we've got the data in play. Now it comes down to, okay, what kind of questions does, or what kind of question or questions does a business owner ask, or a decision maker or a client or a stakeholder? What kind of questions do they end up asking? So we'll start off with a very basic pivot table. We'll create that, and then we'll get into the different nitty-gritty of how flexible a pivot table can be, and what are some of the tricks, hidden things that a pivot table offers. So we will try and look at that here. First of all, you'll notice here a pivot table one. You can see the outline, but it's not very helpful in a way. On the right hand side is where all the magic happens. This is where you'll see something called pivot table fields. Now, most of you by default will be seeing this view where you have the columns at the top and the filters, columns, rows, and values at the bottom. That's fine. If that is something you're familiar with, you can absolutely use that. I prefer the other view, which is something I've gotten used to over a lot of years working with Excel. So I prefer that view. I'll show you that how to get there here in case you ever want to, give that view a try. At the top here, next to this pivot table fields, you have this settings icon. By the way, I'm not sure if this is available on a Mac, if anybody is using a Mac. Uh, Excel or Microsoft rather obviously takes away a couple of features in their Office suites for Mac for obvious reasons. So I'm not sure if this will be there. If it's there, great. So if you click on this settings icon, you'll notice I have a lot of options that I can play around with. So I leave this up to you guys. By default, the first one is selected. I will just go ahead and select the second one. I find this very, very useful and makes my work a lot more efficient. So I'll select the second view where it places all the filters, rows, columns, and values on the right hand side and all the columns on the left hand side. So it takes away the scrolling aspect. And second, I can just look vertically through my entire option. So it makes it easier to quickly look at and debug if I run into any sort of issue. But if you want to use the first option, that is entirely up to you. All right, so let's get into the pivot table part. What I want to do first is very simple pivot table where I want to look at on the vertical axis, I want to look at regions. On the horizontal axis, I want to look at categories. And in the intersection between the two, I want to look at sales numbers. Right? Very simple report. Well, let's get that going. So what we can do is you can always, you have these check boxes next to these column names. You can always go ahead and click on them. But I prefer dragging stuff into their respective sections because I don't want to make a mistake like I've made previously in a couple of projects. And I actively tell people don't rely on these check boxes because while Excel is smart enough to usually understand what you are looking for, sometimes it makes mistakes just like we do. So you want to avoid that, especially in a client setting. So what you want is on the x-axis, or not the x-axis, on the vertical axis, we want the regions. So what I'll do is here in this field list, in the column list, I'll take region and I'll drag it into rows. So drag region out of here, drop it into rows. And you can see here, let me just zoom in a little bit. So you can see the regions have come in central, east, south, and west. There's also a blank because there might be a blank in my master sheet, but that's fine. We can ignore that. So region goes into rows. On my horizontal axis, I want categories. So I'll take category here from the field list, drag and drop category into columns, drag and drop category into columns. So we can see the outline of our pivot table is coming in here. We have regions, we have categories, and all I have to do now to understand or try and answer business questions is I want to take this sales column, probably the most common KPI anybody ever wants to monitor. And this sales can be anything. It can be subscriber numbers, customer numbers, number of products sold, number of services rendered, whatever it is. That can be any KPI that you want to monitor. And I'll take sales and I'll drop it into values. Take sales and drop it into values. And just give me 1 second. Let me just get rid of this final row here. And refresh. All right, blank is gone. Great. So region goes into your rows, category goes into your columns, sales goes into values. And as soon as you put sales in values, you'll notice it automatically aggregates that as sum of sales. By default, what Excel does is whatever value you put in this value section, it will always aggregate it to the sum level. You can always change that if you want to look at average, if you want to look at something else, you can absolutely change that. I'll show you how in a second. But by default, it'll always show you sum, regardless of whatever you put in. So Sohan, if you're seeing the blank row, right, what you can do is just in your master sheet, in your query one, go to the bottom of that sheet, just press Control, Shift, and the down arrow key to get to the last row. And you might see a blank row here at the end. Just right click and delete that. A Power Query, I think, just put that one extra blank row at the bottom. I might have missed out on one very simple step. So just right click on that row and just click on delete. Go back to your pivot table, and anywhere in your pivot table, right click and just press refresh. So it'll refresh and it'll take away the blank column and row from your pivot table. All right, so coming back to this, here what I want to do is, first of all, these are huge numbers, right? These are pretty massive numbers. So if I am creating a report to show to anybody, if I show these numbers, you can imagine what will happen, right? There's the door, get out. I don't want to look at this. So I want to format this in a way that is easy for my audience to digest. At the end of the day, whatever we end up doing, especially for a senior audience, has to be quite literally spoon-fed to them so that they don't have to make assumptions. They don't have to get into guesswork. As soon as the audience starts guessing and making assumptions, that's where we start losing our audience. So we want to make it so simple for them, so easy to digest our information, our data, that one look, gone. I understand what Pranav is trying to present. Let me move on to the next aspect of the report. So what we can do is, very quickly, we can format this and then move on to the next part of making this pivot table more flexible. What we can do here is click anywhere in your pivot table. Click anywhere in the pivot table. Go to pivot table analyze here at the top. In your ribbon, you'll have this new section called, or new tab called pivot table analyze. Go to pivot table analyze. This is where you can do all sorts of things with your pivot tables. You can answer questions, make it flexible, take away stuff, add more stuff, make it more dynamic. 10,000 different things are there, nestled very nicely inside this pivot table analyze section. So first of all, what I want to do is, I want to format this entire numbers, all these numbers that I'm seeing. So what I can do is click anywhere, click any number, doesn't matter. You don't have to follow what I'm doing and click on that particular cell. Any cell where you're seeing numbers, click there or select that cell. Here at the top in your pivot table analyze, you have something called field settings. Click on this field settings. There are different ways to get here. This is probably the easiest way. So click on field settings. Click on field settings and ignore what you're seeing right now. Just click on this number format, very nicely nestled away on the bottom left of this pop-up that came up. You have this number format here. So click on number format. Click on number format. And since we're dealing with sales numbers, these are financial numbers, I ideally want to show this in currency format, but that's up to you. You can also show it in number, currency, whatever you prefer. I'll go to currency, and this is United States data, so I'm okay with showing the dollar sign. Depending on who you're creating this report for, which region, whether it's Singapore, Australia, wherever, UK, Europe, you can find all of those currency icons are here, but I'll stick to dollars and that's what we're working with. And since these are pretty huge numbers, decimal places don't make a lot of sense. It doesn't matter if they're like 0.1, 0.2, don't really care. So I can turn decimal places from 1 or 2 to 0. And once you've done that, just hit a round of OK. Just say OK. And just say OK again. So hit 2 OKs. And you can see here it's much more presentable, much more digestible, if I may use that. I don't know if that's even a word or not, but it's basically easier to look at. I can figure out very quickly what are some of the numbers that I'm looking at, and make guesses, assumptions, and all those things based on the information that is in front of me. And these are, it's very nice to look at it. This is probably the most basic version of a pivot table that we can drum up. And all of these are very nice to look at. Great. I can see the values here, raw values and all that. But usually when you're dealing with numbers that are this big or even slightly smaller numbers, a very common ask from our client or our stakeholder is that, Pranav, this is great, but I want to look at what is the percentage share of a particular, let's say, category or a region or a segment at an overall level. So we can see the total sales are about $2.2 million or $2.3 million. But I want to understand, for example, out of that $2.3 million, how much is the furniture category contributing in the central region? What is that share of that particular category in that particular region? A very common ask. And it's actually very, very simple to convert and display that answer in a pivot table. How do we do that? if you go to this values again in your pivot table fields where we had sum of sales, I can convert this raw value into a percentage number in a way that the raw value is still there. Under the hood, it's still there. It's not like we're deleting that. It's just that the way of showing that value is going to change from a raw value into a percentage value. How do we do it? So where it says sum of sales, you'll notice there's a very small drop down button there. So if you go to this sum of sales, click on this drop down button and go to value field settings. So this is the same thing we clicked on field settings. Value field settings is exactly that. This is just another way of getting there. So it doesn't matter. You can use the first version. You can use this one. That's entirely up to your comfort level. I just want to show you both of those versions there. So here, if you click on value field settings, click on value field settings and go to show values as. You have two tabs here, summarize values by, and you can see here I have some count, average, max, min. So you can use these different things, but that's not what we're concerned with here. You're going to go to the second tab where it says show values as. So click on this tab. Click on this show values tab. And here in this drop down where it says show values as, you'll get no calculation by default. Every time you go here, by default, it'll show no calculation. So if you click on this drop down, you have a bunch of other things. And as it says, how do you want to show those values? Show values as what? If you say no calculation, you'll get the raw values, but you want to see the percentage of grand total in this case. So I want you guys to just select the second option, percentage of grand total. Select percentage of grand total and just hit a round of OK. Just hit OK there. So what this has done, first of all, notice on the bottom right, it's still sum of sales. That's not going anywhere. It's still there. However, the way I'm displaying my data has completely changed from values to percentages. And how do I read this? Is in the central region, the furniture category has a contribution of 7% to the overall sales. So the overall is about 100, not about, it's 100%. And this just shows you a breakdown of whatever you have in your pivot table. This is how the breakdown looks like. So in the East region, the technology category has a share of about 11.5% to the overall sales of Superstore. West in the technology has about 11%. So this is how we can break down our analysis and show the answer to the end user. This is how, what is the contribution of a particular thing to the overall sales number. Right now, you'll notice this is divided across the board. So if I select the entire table, here at the bottom, I can see the sum is 100%. I can also try and answer the same question from a different perspective. For example, right now I'm seeing the overall share right across the board broken down by region and category. What if I wanted to look at what is the percentage share of each category per region? Right. So for central region, how much is each category contributing? For East, how much is each category contributing? So on and so forth. When I want to answer that question, it's a very similar way to do it. So I'll go back here to value sum of sales, same process. So I'll go back to value sum of sales. I go to value field settings. Go to value field settings. Show values as. Go to show values as. Instead of this percent of grand total, now I can either select percent of column total or percent of row total. So since I want to answer the question of how much is each category contributing to each is contributing per region, I will select percent of row total. But later on, when you guys are practicing, hopefully later on today, tomorrow, over the weekend, whenever, try out the percent of column total as well. You will, it's very intuitive, you'll understand what is going on. So percent of row total, click on OK. Click on OK. And you can see here now, instead of the overall share, I have a bunch of 100% values here, which means that now across the board for each region, if my mouse decides to work, there it is. So across for the central region, furniture has 32% contribution, office supplies is 33, technology has 34. It's a very even distribution for central region. East, same thing, 100%, south, same thing, west, same thing. So that's how I can use a similar problem statement and try and help the business understand that, boss, based on whatever you want me to analyze, At an overall level, this is the breakdown. At a region level, this is the breakdown. And at a category level, I can just convert this to percentage of column total. This is the breakdown. So you can answer 3 different questions by just making sure you go to show values as and changing that to whatever in the world you want to analyze there. That's how simple it is to convert raw values into percentage share of whatever you want to look at. All right, so if anybody has any questions on the percentage part, it's really that easy. There's nothing else to it. Let me know. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next part of our pivot table and show you how we can use this filter section to dive a little deeper into the report and look at a different angle based on whatever the business wants to do. But if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them right now. Otherwise, we'll move on to that part. All righty, perfect. Okay, so here what I want to do is we have this pivot table. First of all, let's get back to our raw values. So I can just go to field settings here in your pivot table analyze, go to field settings, show values as, and I'll just say no calculation and hit a round of OK, right? So we are back to our view. Now this filters tab has a hidden feature to it. First of all, it does 2 things. One is what you would expect to do. It acts as a filter based on whatever you want to add there, which is fine. But it also does something else, which a lot of people, at least I was not aware of it till at least last year. There was something that I completely passed by until somebody brought this to my attention. And this is what it does. So if I take, let's say, the segment column, if I take the segment column and drop it into my filter section, so take segment from your columns, drop it into the filter section. And as soon as you do that, you notice I have a filter at the top called segment. Fine, that's how filters work in Excel. What's the big deal about it? And if I click on this filter icon next to where it says all, I'll get the different filters that I have here, and I can filter my pivot table by those different things. Okay, great. Well, no big deal there. Here is what I find very interesting is that in this pivot table analyze, staying in the ribbon pivot table analyze, you'll notice here on the left hand side, I have the name of the pivot table, right? So I can, you should rename it to something else, better name if you're creating multiple pivot tables. It doesn't hurt to name pivot tables properly. But here what I'm going to do is below this pivot table name, I have something called options. And next to options, I have a very small button, a drop down button there. If I click on that button, I get 3 options. But the one I'm more concerned with is this second one, show report filter pages. It's very nicely hidden by Excel there, but it is very powerful in a way in terms of what it does. So if I click on show report filter pages, it will show you whatever you put in the filter section. So right now I only have segments. So if I, let's say, put state as well here, and I go back to my options and say show report filter pages, you can see your state has also come in. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and remove state. So go here, click on show report filter pages, and that button will come in. So what this does is, if I click on OK here, notice at the bottom where I have my sheet names, right? If I click on OK, 3 new sheets have come in, 1 each for the different segments that I have. So this is a way of duplicating your existing pivot table and applying a filter based on whatever you put in this filter section. So you can see your home office, corporate, and consumer. So instead of worrying about copy pasting it or creating new pivot tables, save yourself the time. If you want to look at and understand the different segments, different categories, different subcategories, different customers, you can put that column in filters and you can just use show report filter pages, select that column, and you'll open up 3, 4, however many values you have, those number of sheets will open up so that you don't have to waste time creating pivot tables again and again, and you can work on these different pivot tables based on that. I'm going to go ahead and delete this since this has no use for us, but I quickly want to show you that aspect. Another very interesting aspect is, which Excel does not explicitly show, is when you're showing this pivot table, quite often the client will tell you, okay, Pranav, this is fine, but I want to understand, for example, the South region furniture category has a very low value as compared to everything else. It's pretty low value here. how can I want to analyze that a little bit further. I want to dive deeper into the data and see what could potentially be causing the revenue or the sales numbers to be so low relative to the other numbers that I have. So one way to do this is I can go back to my data. I can go here. I can, you know, divide this. I can go to wherever the region column is, filter it by the south region, then apply different filters. It's one way to do it, and that's how most people end up doing it. The easier way to do it, far easier, is if I click on whatever the client wants, if I double click on that value, if I just double click on that value in my pivot table, it opens up a new sheet for me with that filter pre-applied. So I am only looking at the south region and the furniture category here. And you can click on any of these pivot table values to dive deeper into whatever that intersection is. So East region office supplies, click on this. And if I go back here and I show you guys the region, you notice this is only the south region. There's nothing else here because I double clicked on that particular intersection, that particular cell. It removed everything else and is only showing me that level of granularity at the south region for the whatever furniture category that we had. All other categories and regions gone. I'm only looking at that level of granularity here. So if ever you want to dive deeper, you don't have to go here and apply filters and waste time there. Just double click and get to whatever analysis you want to get to. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. So that is how we can very quickly open up that depth in your pivot table. All right. So that was two very simple tricks that I have found very helpful in my career. Now, a couple of things I want to do. I think we have about 10 minutes remaining. One is I want to show you slicers. Slicers are one of the best parts of using pivot tables in the first place. So if I go here to pivot table analyze, if I go to pivot table analyze, you have two options: insert slicer, insert timeline. Insert timeline is another slicer. So if I click on insert slicer here, if you click on insert slicer, you will get all your columns are listed here. So slicers are nothing but dynamic filters. These are filters that your end user can interact with. Clients absolutely love slicers and they look nice, they're very nice, and you can use them as much as you want in your pivot tables, in your dashboards, wherever you want. You can use them in these pivot tables and just general tables in Excel. So here what I can do is let me pick a column we haven't worked with. So let's take shipping mode. So let's take ship mode. Let me click on ship mode. And you can select anything. You don't have to literally follow along with me. You can select any of these columns and click on OK. And here a slicer comes in, which shows me the 4 different shipping modes that I have. First class, same day, second class, standard class. And you can probably imagine why clients love and the end user loves this, right? So if I only want to look at, okay, just show me how have I done across regions and categories where the delivery or the shipping mode was same day delivery. So if I click on same day, the pivot table updates based on what I select in that slicer. If I select second class, I can see the second class values, standard class values, first class values. If I want to select multiple things, here at the top next to this name of the slicer ship mode, you'll get this icon where you have that checkbox kind of thing, which is nothing but multi-select. So if I click on this, I can now select multiple things at the same time. So if you want to look at first class and same day, how much are they contributing to my overall sales? I can select both of them. I can select 3. I can select all 4. I can remove one. So you can multi-select, multi-deselect based on whatever you're looking for. And to remove any selections, to go back to your default view, you have this remove or clear filter icon. Click on that and you are back to your default view. That's what slicers do. You can add in as many slices as you want. You can click on the pivot table, go to pivot table analyze, click on insert slicer. You can add anything. Let's say city, customer name, click on OK, and more slices will keep coming in based on what you, however, whatever is the level of granularity that you want to display, all of that is there in these slices, and you can keep adding that based on your understanding of your audience, obviously. Don't just add slices because they look nice, add them because they add business value, and just distribute them across your report or dashboard as you see fit. Here is one very quick tip. on how you can save yourself space when you have multiple slicers is if I right click on this slicer. Right now, you'll see this by default. Excel shows you the options in a vertical format. If I right click on this, and I go to size and properties, not slicer settings, but size and properties. So I go to size and properties. Here you'll get this option of format slicer. Now, very nicely hidden away is this section of position and layout. Very nicely hidden away is position and layout. If I expand this, you get this option of number of columns. Right now, you have these 4 options there, and it's 1 column. If you want, let's say, 2 columns side by side, I can just type in 2 here and press enter. What this does is it divides your slicer into 2 columns like this. So it saves yourself space, at least vertically anyway. And you can add as many as you want. If I say 3 columns, it says 3. If I add 4, it should make sense as well. If I can't see the name, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But in this case, 2 is fine. So you can change the number of columns from here as well. All right, so you can play around with slicers. You can work with slicers. Another aspect of a pivot table that a lot of people use in the industry is I want to showcase some values. I want to emphasize on some values based on the data that I have. And this is where conditional formatting comes in very, very handy. So in our case, what I want to show is I want to highlight all the values that are, let's say, above a certain threshold. I'll just pick an arbitrary threshold of $200,000. So any value above $200,000, I want to highlight. That's a good thing as an analyst or as a salesperson. I want my client or the end user to say, yeah, I really like this. There are so many values above $200,000. I want to highlight that. So how can I do that? All you have to do is just select your table. Just select your pivot table. So Mahesh, I'll just show you that in a second. So select your pivot table. Go to conditional formatting. Go to conditional formatting. And here you have a bunch of things like highlight cell rules, top bottom rules, etc., etc. So I'll show you a couple in a second. First of all, I want to show everything above 200,000, or I want to highlight everything above $200,000. So I'll go to this first option, highlight cell rules. Go to highlight cell rules, go to greater than, and you have these different options here as well to play around with. So greater than, and here just type in 200,000. Just type in 200,000. And you can filter that or format that with whatever format you want. So by default, it'll always show you red fill with dark red text, but I'm showing a happy thing. I'm showing a value, a good sales value. I don't want to show it in red. I want to show it in green. So in this drop down, I'll select green fill with dark green text and click on OK. So all the values above $200,000 have been highlighted for me in my pivot table here. You can play around with this. You can look at below, less than a value, between a certain range based on whatever you're creating. You can look at these different things. You also have something called data bars here, which you might have seen, you might have worked with, or might have seen online. A lot of people use this in dashboards in Excel. Is what these data bars do. If I click on any one, for example, I just use the default blue data bar. What this does is relative to the highest value in your pivot table, which in our case is $264,000. It displays a bar in each cell to tell the end user that this is how that value compares to the highest or the maximum value in that pivot table or in that range that I've selected. So compared to $264,000, central region furniture category is somewhere around the half mark, is around, let's say, 60-70% mark. East is here, south is the lowest, so on and so forth. So data bars are very helpful from a presentation point of view, where you want the audience to take away that based on or relative to the highest value, this is how across the board my sales numbers have done based on different criteria I have in my pivot table. That's what data bars do. What my suggestion is, when you guys are practicing these kind of things later, what you can do is you can go to you try out different things. You go to color scales, try out different color scales. Go to icon sets. These are your typical KPI icon sets. Try out those different things there, and work with that. I can always take another webinar on advanced pivot table techniques at a later point in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks down the line. But all of the basic level stuff is here in conditional formatting that you can try out. All right, so one final thing I want to do here before we end is I want to just show you how do I, in a pivot table, how do I calculate the difference of a value compared to a benchmark or the previous year's sales, for example. How do I do that in a pivot table? So what I'll do is I'll just duplicate this pivot table. Just hold down Control on your keyboard. Hold down Control on your keyboard and just drag this sheet to the right hand side. And that's how you can quickly duplicate a pivot table. So hold down Control, take your mouse, drag this pivot table and just drag it to the right hand side to duplicate this. And here what I'll do is, first of all, I want to get rid of the conditional formatting. So I'll go to this conditional formatting tab. I'll go to clear rules and I'll just say clear rules from entire sheet. Clear rules from entire sheet. Next, what I'm going to do is I will remove category here from my columns. Remove category and I'll get rid of the slicer here as well. And here I will take this year column and I'll put that in columns. So take year, drag and drop it into your columns. Take year, drag and drop it into the columns. Go to design here at the top. Go to design in your ribbon. Go to design. And what I'm going to do is I want to get rid of this grand total because that will add nothing to what I'm going to do here. So I want to hide these column and row grand totals. So go to design. Go to design. Go to grand totals here on the left hand side and just say off for rows and columns. The first option, off for rows and columns. This doesn't delete it. It just hides those. You can always get it back by going to the same place and just selecting on. All right. So here next what I'm going to do is a very common another business question is I want to see how have I done in terms of sales, number of customers, number of subscribers, number of products, items sold this year as compared to last year, or this month as compared to last month, this quarter as compared to last quarter. Very common question. There are different ways of doing it. A lot of people just use formulas. That's perfectly fine. But without using formulas, we can do that in a pivot table. How? This is how. So if I go to this value sum of sales, if I go to this value sum of sales again, click on the drop down, go to value field settings. Go to value field settings. Again, go to the second tab which says show values as. Go to show values as. Where it says no calculation, instead of these percentages of grand total, I want you guys to just scroll down a little bit and find this option of difference from. Not percentage difference, but just the default difference from. We're not done. Please don't click on OK. Select difference from. Scroll down. You have two options now, base field and base item. So scroll down. Your base field is your year. So wherever year is. So select year. It's actually the top. So don't scroll down. Scroll up. Find year. And the base item is where your benchmark happens. Now, when you're calculating the difference from what? Difference from the previous year, that's what we want. But if, for example, you want to compare sales this year to the first year you opened your store or you calculated or you have the data for, so you can hard code that in that compare all the values to a certain year or a certain month or a certain quarter. In our case, I want to compare the current year to the previous year, then move on current year to the previous year. So here I'll just select previous. In base item, I'll just select previous and I'll hit a round of OK. So what this has done is it's looked at the current value, it's looked at the previous value, and it's calculated the difference for us. And it's told us that based on the previous year's value, in 2019 for the central region, we actually fell short by about $1,000. In the East region in 2019, compared to 2018, our sales exceeded the previous year's sales by $27,000. In South, we fell short by $32,000. In 2020, as compared to 2019, it was just money across the board, and 2021, except the central region, everywhere else, as compared to 2020, we've made a very healthy amount of money as compared to that. And I can further make this a little bit more presentable by selecting this entire thing. So Koinav, sure, just give me a second. By selecting this entire table, hitting Control 1 on your keyboard, hit Control 1 on your keyboard, hit Control 1 on your keyboard, and go to this last option called Custom. Go to Custom. This is going to be a little difficult, so if you're not able to follow along, that's fine. You can always do it in the recording later. Go to Custom, select this 7th option from the top. This is what is called as regular expressions. This is an entire field by itself. I am not great with regular expressions, but I know how to do this particular part very well because I've used this a lot for my reports. So select this 7th option where you see this red here from the top, you see red. All I want you guys to do is just here at the start of this formula bar, in square brackets, just put in green. Just put in green, that's it. And click on OK. So what this does is wherever there was a positive change as compared to the previous year, it highlights it in green. Wherever there was a negative, basically a drop year on year, it highlights that particular value in red. And I can further make this better from a KPI perspective is I can add an up arrow emoji here as well, right? So if I just go, I just pick these up from these websites. So if I click on copy and I go back and I select this, in front of this, all I'll do is I will just paste this arrow that I picked up and click on OK. So you can see here, wherever there is a positive trend for that particular year, a green arrow pointing upwards comes. Then you can apply the same logic for the losses. Well, you can use a down arrow for those losses. So I can answer these kind of questions from a presentation reporting point of view by customizing the way my data is shown by looking at these different things. All right, so okay, Mahesh's question, one final, I'll pick this up, is how do I do calculated fields in a pivot table? So if I click anywhere in this pivot table and I go to pivot table analyze in the ribbon, I have this option called fields, items, and sets, right? Fields, items, and sets. If I go here and I have this option of calculated field. If you've used calculated fields in Tableau or Power BI, this is exactly what it is. So if I go to calculated field, I can create a column that only exists inside a pivot table. So you won't see this physical column in your master sheet. You won't see it anywhere except in the pivot table for this particular workbook. So I'm just going to use a very simple logic here. Let me say, let me call this target sales. Let's call this target sales. And the formula I'll use here is just take your sales value. So I'll scroll down, double click on sales. So equal to sales, and I'll just multiply sales by 10%. A very arbitrary way of doing this. Nobody will ever say that just add 10% to sales and calculate target. But just to see how this works, I'll just say sales into 1.1. 1.1 is nothing but adding 10% to the actual sales value. If you want to subtract 10%, just do an into 0.9. We want to add it, so we'll say into 1.1 and click on add. And as soon as you do that, you'll notice here in the background in my pivot table fields, target sales has come in. So if I click on OK, now I have the target sales as well. So I can look at the actual sales versus target sales, and I can keep adding more and more calculate fields like this, which only exist inside the pivot table. This is especially helpful when you want to look at or answer questions like what was the target for that year. Obviously, you will know your domains better, but I can create that quick calculation and get it here. And if I look at my original data, there is nothing called target sales here because, like I said, this calculated field only exists inside a pivot table itself. That's it. All right, so I'm going to save this. I'll stop here, guys. I have covered quite a lot here. Hopefully, and we've gone 10 minutes over. But whenever I start talking about Excel, Power BI, Tableau, I can't seem to stop, and I just keep talking on and on. And I can go on for another hour here at this rate, but I will pause here. And if you have any questions or general any questions about Excel analytics in general, anything of the sort, feel free to ask me. Otherwise, what I will do is I'm just going to go ahead and share my email ID with you guys in case you have questions later, or you want to just brainstorm anything, and just put that in the chat window. Feel free to ask me those, whatever doubts you have, anything you need, any feedback on, feel free to ask me there. Otherwise, we'll stop here. So any questions, anybody, feel free to put in the chat window. I will share the recording probably later tonight, or most likely tomorrow morning. And I will share all the resources and all of that there. All right. Okay, very quiet crowd today. All right, thanks, Join. Absolutely, we can have one in the next couple of weeks or 3 weeks. I'll see my calendar and I can definitely find time for that. So Komal, great question. Thank you for the kind words, by the way. If a lot of for Excel, actually, that's probably the most common one. So my suggestion is there's a channel on YouTube called what was the channel called? Called Trump Excel, I think Trump Excel. Nothing to do with the name of the president of the United States, ex-president. It's a great channel that shows you different concepts from beginner to advanced level. So you should definitely follow that. It's worth following. Additionally, I have also started a channel. If any of you guys are interested in following, I'll be posting the recording there itself. But I'll also be putting in a lot of different videos there on Excel and Power BI. So you can just subscribe to that if you want. I just shared the link in the chat window. I will be posting stuff there, and I'll share a couple of resources anyway later on. Let me just pause this. Later on in the when I send you the email for the recording, I'll share a couple of resources there as well. Okay, so everyone, let me stop here. It is Tuesday evening. I'm sure you guys have other things that you want to do here for the rest of the evening. So all right, Shubham, I'll just answer your question. Everybody else, thank you so much for being a lovely audience. I hope you found this useful, and I will share the recording link later on. Have a very nice rest of the day, and all the best in your journeys. Cheers, everyone.